First, I'm Jeff Bertram. I'm the sports trustee. Don't have a lot to do with the weeds in the lake other than Janelle, who is our executive secretary. Her and I kind of scrambled to put the PowerPoint together, and we're kind of running the AV. So we figured I'd introduce everybody here. If we go to the next, again, this is being recorded, so if you speak up and ask a question, your voice is going to go on our website, okay? Your questions will go on your website to go through. We're going to do introductions to the trustees and who's here from our weed treatment company. We'll go through the presentation. The presentation is about 20 minutes. There is about a 3-minute video to kind of show you some things that are going on in the Bay and Lagoon. Those are the topics we'll go over, and then we're going to leave the last 30 minutes for open Q&A. If it takes longer than that, we can go a little bit longer than that. If it doesn't take that long, free to go. One big thing is please save your questions for the end. There's lots of information in here, okay, and it has the potential to be addressed as we go through and show all the different things that are going on, okay? So to not get sidetracked and be here till 10 o'clock at night, if you can save your questions for the end, take a note on some paper, take a note on your phone, take a mental note. We'll answer anything that you have at the end. If we don't have the answer, we'll get the answer and get back to you, okay? So introductions. First, I introduced myself, Janelle, wave high in the back. Janelle's our secretary. She's the executive on the trustee board. This is Ron Tofolo. He's our weeds trustee. Shannon Meyer is our lake trustee. Ginny is up front here. She's our lake treasurer. Did any other trustees make it on tonight? I know they're like all on vacation this week. Part of the reason we got roped into being here. And then Kevin Shank from our weed treatment company, Solitude. So that's who's here today. Hopefully any of us can answer your questions. Guidelines, again, keep all the questions to the end. Treat everybody with respect. We're all trying to get the same thing accomplished. It's not easy, okay? So I really don't have to say anything more about that. Go ahead, Jenny. Ron, I'll turn it over to you. Go right ahead.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Well, thanks everybody for coming. This is a really big turnout. I just want to make sure that, number one, everybody realizes that we said this meeting is about weeds. We're talking about lake weeds, right? Nothing else. Just making sure. And also, everybody here is either a member or a resident who has paid upkeep, correct? Is there anyone here who doesn't fall under those two categories?
Well, I mean, he's my guest.
That's fine.
Out of town.
That's fine, yep. That's fine, not a problem. All right, so then I guess we can get started. So my name's Ron Tofolo. I'm the weed trustee. I've been the weed trustee for quite some time. And, you know, it's a challenge. You know, you don't want to eradicate all of the weeds because you need some aquatic vegetation for fish growth, for oxygenation in the water, for other things. But, you know, you try to keep a balance between the proper amount of weeds and the proper amount of weed control. And that's always the trick to it. And sometimes the weeds win, and sometimes we win. And that's, you know, a fact of nature. So let's just go through some of the things. So, yeah, I mean, this is some history of the lake. You know, everybody knows that Indian Lake was a man-made lake. There was a stream that went through here. The trees, everything were chopped down. They flooded the area back in the early 1900s, built properties to make the summer home, and Indian Lake was born. Monkey Island, which I just found out by reading this, was made of the sediment on the bottom of the lake. That stuff that you guys step in and you go, yuck, well, that's what Monkey Island's made of. I did not know that. And Fireman's Field was filled using, yeah, forget that. Go to the next slide.
They used the septic trucks to suck the muck off the lake, and they used the muck to fill in Fireman's Field. So, which obviously you can't do that.
Okay, so the areas of the lake that we refer to is, you know, we have the main lake, which is this area out here. Then you go under the bridge by Franklin Road. That first body of lake is what we call the bay. Then there's another bridge in the back, and that small area is what we refer to as the lagoon. Then as you go down this way by the waterfall where the diving board beach is, that goes down, that's, I guess, the diving board beach, and the water underneath to the other side. I think Indian Lake owns that, we're not sure, but there are a couple of homes around there. It's something that we typically, it doesn't have access for everybody. So we do treat that for lily pads, you know, as a courtesy. That's one of the things that we do. And then Indian Spring Pond is a little pond behind the clubhouse back here. It has residents around it too. And again, there's no member access to that, just the people who live there, but we do control that for keeping the area clean. Okay, so the biggest problems we have, which you guys know, I mean, there are two kinds of weeds, and Kevin's going to go into this, but you have the rooted vegetation, which are the ones that grow up and look like weeds, and we'll go into the different type. And then you have your floating gunk, that you guys call it, the filamentous algae, which grows on the top. In the back areas, we have a lot of problem with the filamentous algae. That's what the biggest problem with the bay and lagoon are, because the water's so shallow. We do treat back there. There isn't a lot of rooted vegetation, a lot of the plants that you see in the main lake here. So because of that, which is good, there's nothing to compete with the nutrients in the water and the oxygen and the sunlight and everything else. So that's why you get these purges of filamentous algae. And also the fact that the water, the average depth back there is about 1.5 feet. So the key to maintaining back there really is dredging. And we'll get into that in a bit. But you know, so what we try to do is when the algae forms on the top, we try to come down and treat it, you know, as best we can. You know, these guys aren't on call 24/7 to come down. They treat a bunch of lakes. We have a contract with them, and they're supposed to be coming out here maybe 3 times a month in the summer. They usually come out here a little more because we call them, but you know, that's what we contracted for, to treat. And there's also just a certain amount of chemicals that they can use back there. So we do what we can when it pops up, but again, it's not an instantaneous thing. It's, you know, we're dealing with nature here. Some of the things that cause that are, you know, people who use fertilizers. So we have non-phosphorus fertilizers that we've said many times. If you're going to fertilize your lawn and you use regular fertilizer, when you water your lawn or it rains, a lot of that will wash into the lake. That fertilizes the lake. It gives nutrients into the filamentous algae and the other weeds, and they grow. So all we're doing basically is feeding the weeds. So key is if you're gonna fertilize your lawns in front of that, and not only if you live on the lake, but anywhere, because the water comes down into the basin and goes into the lake. So anyone living in the lake community should not be using fertilizer with phosphorus in it, because that's just gonna really wreak havoc and cause everything to grow. The other thing too is we've seen in the past where people who live on the lake mow their lawn and dump the clippings into the lake or rake their leaves into the lake. All that does is, again, puts organic matter into the lake, it decomposes, feeds nutrient, and causes the lake to, you know, to grow the algae and the other plants. And it also, when it decomposes, it goes down, and turns into sediment, and that raises the depth of the bottom, which makes the lake shallower and shallower. So in the back at one time, I understand that there was an island back there in the lagoon where people used to have tennis courts and picnic baskets, and they used to swim, and it was a lot deeper. Now it's not so much. So a lot of that has to do with the sediment and the lake going in. All right, let's talk about some of the types of weeds here. So watermeal, you could read this yourself. It's small in size. You can see the pictures here. Water hyacinths and algae. So we've had actually 2 kinds of algae here. We have the filamentous algae, which is the stuff that looks like hair, that's the nuisance stuff. We've also had like planktonous algae. The one algae we really haven't had, or maybe we've had a little bit of, was that blue-green algae that eats people that they had in the Pakong a couple of years ago. So we've been pretty fortunate there. And I know we've been pretty aggressive with the treatment to make sure we haven't had that. So, you know, knock wood, that hasn't happened. Duckweed, you guys just had a big bloom of that, which they came and treated. That's that green stuff, looks like tiny little clovers that float on the top. That was back, they actually covered 3/4 of the lagoon and a lot of the bay. That was treated, that's gone. Now nothing's competed with it, so you've got filamentous algae replacing it. Coontail, naiad we get in the main lake, and milfoil as well. I think it's another nuisance weed that you'll see growing here. Sometimes if you're going under the bridge, you'll see these weeds coming up and cresting the top. When that happens, we'll go ahead and do a treatment. Typically we do 2 treatments a year. One in May to get that down, and then you'll have this late July, early August bloom. We'll treat it again to get that. And that's mainly a function of the main lake, because We have deep water depths here, so you don't have the algae, but you will have that rooted vegetation. And then these are some of the other ones that we have. Milfoil, hydrilla. Okay, anything else? All right, so with that, we contracted Solitude Lake Management. They are and again, I'll let Kevin talk about the company itself, but they are a large company. They originally were Allied Biological. They were bought out by Solitude. We used Allied years ago. We started using them again, and then they, with the merger, they went into Solitude. And we have an annual contract with them. I think it's a 2-year contract. And what they do is they will come around and monitor the lake 2 times a month from April to September, and once in October. And they'll just make sure that, see how things are, and if it needs a treatment. That's how, you really can't look at from the shore. You need to get out in the boat and see what's growing, and then look at the different areas and treat it. In the back, they can't use the big airboat. I'm sure you guys saw it as you came in here. The big fan boat, that's what they use for applying the stuff in the main lake. In the back, they have to go in with a smaller boat because they can't get that in there, and that's when they do like the copper sulfate treatment for the algae and things like that. So they do other tests too. They do water quality, pH, alkalinity, all this other stuff, and that's important too in terms of the ability to use herbicides and pesticides in the lake, because it has to have a certain water temperature, a certain pH for it to work. They'll come around, they inspect it, any growth of undesirable weeds. They treat invasive as unwanted submerged floating vegetation. So the other one we have are the water lilies, which you guys have seen, right? Those are the ones, and some people like them, some people hate them. They have these big tubers. So 2 ways to get rid of them. One, when the lake is down, you pull them up by the tubers, and you pull it out, and that's really hard. You're getting in with the muck. The other way is we use something called a contact herbicide, where they will let the chemical sit on top of the leaf itself. In order for that to work, it's got to sit there for a couple of days. So wind, waves, stuff like that, if it washes it off. And keep me honest here, Kevin.
It's pretty much it doesn't have to be a couple days. It has to be placed on top of the lily when the lily is dry. So again, I plan on doing a lily treatment in the bay in the lagoon on Monday, weather permitting. It has to sit on top of the dry lily, and then we have a surfactant that's essentially something like Elmer's glue. So it kind of makes it sticky, so then it sticks on top of the lily pad then transports it from the top of the lily down into the rhizome, so it doesn't just kill the lily on top, it sucks the product down into the rhizome to kill it from the bottom. As lilies are very hard to kill any other way than that, because you've got this big huge rhizome that's growing in the sediment. You could snip them off on top. People do that all the time. They'll just go out and they'll trim the tops off. Well, you'll get 2 or 3 more lily pads that come up from that same rhizome after you do that.
So that's like pruning a rose, or
yes.
And then it just comes
So,
back.
I mean, essentially you will kill it after a long time after you snip it off, but for that rhizome to lose all of its energy, you're going to resprout a bunch of different lilies from that. So.
Great. Next slide. Yeah, so these, as a matter of fact, you know what, I'm going to turn it over to you because you're the expert. So these are the chemicals that you guys use. Go ahead.
Very informative. You know your stuff. So the products that we use most of the time in your lake for algae is copper sulfate. Copper sulfate is the best product cost-wise and effectiveness-wise for algae. Essentially, for the filamentous algae, it will make the cells of the algae kind of explode. It eats away at the outside cells and kills it from the outside in. Good thing with that is there's no restrictions for copper sulfate. You can put it in the water, no, it's not going to prevent you from swimming, fishing, anything. Most of our products don't have a lot of restrictions at all. So the biggest restriction that we have is our irrigation. We're putting a product in the lake that's going to kill the weeds. If you were to suck water directly out of the lake and put it on your lawn after the treatment, it's going to essentially do the same thing to your lawn. So, as a precaution, we say not to use it for irrigation. Now, at the rates that I put it in the lake, you're probably not going to see that happen in your lawn, but as a precaution, we don't want you to irrigate for 5 days after that. When I do treatments, I put signs around the lake. If you've seen the orange signs, I staple them to the post or the telephone poles around the lakes. Reward and Tribune, they're the same product. We use Tribune now. It's a diquat product. That is our contact herbicide. Contact herbicides work by touching the plant. So you put it into the water column, it goes around and intermixes with the water around the plants, and it kills by contact. That's a product that we use significantly less now. I used it. You can't use it in parts of the lake where it's shallow, because if you stir up the sediment on the bottom of the lake while you're doing the treatment, any turbidity or sediment in the water will prevent the product from its full effectiveness. So one that's not on here that we started using last year, we used it again this year with great success in the main lake, was a product called Aqua Strike. It is a combination of Tribune and another product that's not on here. So it's a combo product. It works in two different ways, but it works together. One thing you have is, I've been here for 6 years, and we've used Tribune. 2 years ago, we did a large-scale treatment with Tribune, and it just did not work that well. So the reason because of that is the plants in your lake can build up tolerance. They can build a tolerance to that product. So year after year, if you continue using the same thing over and over again, those plants build up a tolerance to that product. So when we switch, we like to try to keep it moving different times. There's different technologies out there. New product came that's the mixture of the two, works very well. You throw a new product into the mix. We had the water thread pondweed that was up to the surface here beside the swim area on the other side of the beach the whole way over to the swimming area earlier this I think that was early June. Mm-hmm. I had treated that with the Clipper Schooner product, and it just didn't knock it down. That was another one, must have had a little bit of tolerance to it. So we switched over, we hit it again with the new product. I came back 2 weeks later, I didn't even have a stem of it on the bottom. So finding that effective product to use is something that we do. We keep trying and figuring out what works, and then we can go back, switch between them so we don't build up those tolerances. And the Aqua Rodeo is the contact herbicide for the lily pads. And it's a glyphosate-based product. If anyone's heard of glyphosate products in the news, there's reports out there that say it is carcinogen. There's reports out there that says it's not a carcinogen. What I will say is, when I apply it, I am personally using PP, and it is at an extremely low rate. So after it's on the lily, after it dries, it can't be passed or rubbed off, or it can't be passed on. So I agree it's a perfectly safe product, and we use it at such a low rate that it's a minuscule amount of product.
That's like a Roundup type product?
Yes, same active ingredient that's in Roundup. So.
Hey, can you talk about the biologics? The silk-eating biologics? Yes.
We had added muck pellets to the contract last year. That is essentially a lake probiotic. It is a beneficial bacteria that comes in what looks like a dog food pellet. And we were going to use that in the bay, in the lagoon this year, to help stimulate decomposition of the organic material that's on the bottom of the bay and the lagoon. New Jersey decided that in April that they wanted to look at the product and possibly permit the product. And we've been in a stalemate with the state of New Jersey ever since. So we've tried to submit a permit. They don't know what permit you're supposed to, or they haven't decided what permit they want submitted for it yet. So that would be a good product to use in those shallower areas. Because year after year, you use these muck pellets, and you may only get a couple inches a year, but a couple inches a year over a long period of time, you could get rid of the organics that are down there. Because there's a lot of organic material. And again, it doesn't help that the large blooms of filamentous algae pop up in there because I can kill them, but essentially that stays there. So there is no silver bullet for those areas. It's a lot of reactive instead of proactive with the situation in the bay and the lagoon.
Great, thanks. Next slide. Yeah, these are the costs. So it's about $20,000 a year is what we pay for the service. To be honest with you, in terms of, there have been some comments about, do we treat the main lake more than the back lagoon areas and stuff? And I think the answer to that is it depends. It depends on what areas, need the attention. I don't think, we purposely say we're going to spend this amount on the main lake and this amount on the back. It's whatever needs treatment gets treated. Last year we put in the bubblers, and Shannon will talk about those. I mean, the cost on that was $20,000. Yeah, in addition to the weed stuff. So, comments like that I read on Facebook and stuff that people come up with, I don't know where they get the information from, but it's not true. The contract itself basically is the whole lake contract, whatever needs it. And obviously the main lake is a lot bigger than the back areas, so you're gonna need more chemicals to treat the main lake than you would in the back. It's just mathematics. But we don't favor like one area in favor of another. They're different problems and different issues. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that there's no, it's not a red-headed stepchild in the back that we're forgetting about. It's all important to us. And Kevin knows, I mean, most of the calls he gets from me is about the bay and the lagoon more so than the main lake. So just want to put that out there. And I think that's it for weeds. So we're going to hold the weed questions till the end.
Yep. We're going to go through the aerators.
Thank you,
That's
Kevin.
part of
Yep.
that's part of the weed treatment strategy that we have.
Okay.
So
Perfect.
we'll go through. So go ahead. Do we want to watch the video first?
Sure.
Yeah, we'll get into the stuff.
Sure.
How they work.
Sure.
Now, I have this one tiny little speaker here. This video will be online if you guys want to watch. But whatever he's saying is annotated at the bottom. Okay?
Make sure you listen because I don't talk loud.
With this place. And I have no volume. It's okay. Whatever he's saying is written down here at the bottom. And I will work to get
The aeration system and wind keep the dugout well mixed. The limited amount of algae floating in the water allows the light to reach the bottom of the dugout. This encourages the growth of rooted weeds at the bottom of the dugout. The aeration system and the wind combine to maintain high concentrations of oxygen throughout the dugout. A small amount of algae dies and falls to the bottom of the dugout. The dead algae decomposes and consumes oxygen. The aeration system keeps the oxygen concentrations high and the dugout well mixed. Water quality remains good. The sun heats the surface water which floats on the cold, deeper water. This reduces the ability of the wind to mix the water at the bottom of the dugout. Conditions are suitable for algae growth. The sun continues to heat the surface water, limiting the mixture of the top few feet. The surface algae blooms becomes thick, restricting the light penetration to the top level of the dugout. Rooted weeds growth is limited to the edges of the dugout. Green algae consume all the available nitrogen, die and fall to the bottom, where they decompose using oxygen, which is not replaced. The absence of oxygen in the water allows plant nutrients, e.g. nitrogen, phosphorus, and metals, e.g. iron, manganese, which are trapped in the sediment to dissolve into the water. Water quality deteriorates at the bottom. The water temperature cools. All the algae dies and falls to the bottom of the dugout. The aeration system and wind continue to maintain high concentration of oxygen throughout the dugout. The surface water temperature cools and creates a uniform temperature throughout the dugout. All algae decompose and fall to the bottom, consuming oxygen at the bottom of the dugout. The uniform temperature allows the wind to mix the dugout, increasing oxygen concentrations throughout the dugout and temporarily improves the water quality. Oxygen is carried to the bottom of the dugout by the circulating water. Dead organic material decays aerobically at the bottom of the dugout. Water quality remains good. Oxygen is supplied to the dugout from the aeration system and the atmosphere. The oxygen is carried to the bottom of the dugout by the circulating water. Dead organic materials decays aerobically at the bottom of the dugout. Water quality remains good. Very little oxygen diffuses through the ice. Water quality near the surface remains good. Algae decay quickly consumes available oxygen and becomes anaerobic. Water quality begins to deteriorate at the bottom of the dugout. Unanaerobic conditions, the layer of poor quality water quickly grows and moves upward. Nitrogen and phosphorus move from the sediment into the water. Hydrogen sulfide, H2S, forms and produces a rotten egg smell. Water quality continues to deteriorate. Dugout water becomes a constant temperature as the heat of the sun melts the ice. Oxygen diffuses into the water from the atmosphere and is carried to the bottom of the dugout by the circulating water. Nutrients remain trapped in the sediment. How much longer is this? Dugout water becomes
You're in spring. You're back to spring. You're almost done.
Dugout water becomes a constant temperature as the heat of the sun melts the ice. Wind blowing over the dugout surface causes a turnover of the water, mixing poor quality water throughout the dugout. I've missed the last piece. Click here to learn.
Sorry about the sound there, but this will be on mine.
Thank you, Ron.
My pleasure.
Very well done. Of course, we tested this ahead of time and it worked fine. Yeah. And we get out of this. If it lets me get out of this. Awesome.
Okay. Okay. So, I'm going to do my very best to project my voice. I am not a loud person, so this is screaming. I apologize, those who cannot hear me. I know, I didn't really want to stand up, and I don't, but sure. So this past November, we started our venture into installing the aerators. The aerators were 100% funded through the hard work of the volunteers in this lake, the Fundraising Committee, donations by the Women's Club and the Men's Club, and some by the Trustees as well. Here is some of the breakdown of the cost. The town permit was $150. Can you all read this from where you're sitting? No? Okay. So then I will. So aerators and the installation. For the two different we got two aerators, came to $18,432, and the electrical work was $2,984. So the total was roughly $2,100. Or 21,000, I'm sorry. It's been a very long month for me. These aerators, they do have some ongoing costs, one being the electricity to run them. We only are going to be running these aerators from spring to the end of fall. We're going to turn them off in the winter to allow the back bay lagoon area to freeze so that we can hopefully have some ice skating. I'm sorry, if I can't hear you, but we're going to try to keep the questions till the end if that's okay. And if you can't hear me, raise your hand. I will try to scream louder. So right now, this is only an estimate we have is roughly $1,700 for 3 months of use. So we're estimating that it's going to cost about $7,000 a year for electricity. The maintenance, we put in $2,500 for a placeholder. We have not had to do any maintenance on them. We don't, knock on wood, expect to have to do any maintenance in the near future. We turn them off and then we turn them back on. It's just air blowing through tubing, and that's it for a startup. So us putting $2,500 away, let's say air marking $2,500 every year, after 5 to 10 years will cover the cost of having to replace a major pump or something of the like. And then other is, once again, just another placeholder if there's maybe electrical work or something else. So we can move to the next. So in this picture, we only purchased 2 aerators right now. So we did phase 1 and 2, which are the 2 houses up here, 1 and 2. And as you can see in the drawing, there's 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4 through 5, and then 2.1 through 1 and 5. So what those are is there's the main component that each unit is housing, and then they each have arms. So imagine it like, I guess, a hand. And each finger is tubing that is weighted down along the bottom. And I'm sure when these first went in, if you all had kind of saw, like, oh my God, they put in so many aerators, because that's what people ask me. I thought you were only putting in 2, and I see, 7 aerators or 8 aerators. Well, they really are only 2 aerators, but they all have tubing, weighted tubing, that's extended to different areas, and they're specifically marked in those specific spaces or spots on the bay and lagoon to help create the proper airflow of water within the water and oxygenate the water in the proper pattern to help. We would like to install the third one. We wanted to, number one, make sure that these 2 worked well, provided the correct result before spending another, $10,000, $11,000. And we wanted to, that was really our main goal, was just to make sure that they worked well. And then also, obviously, the funds. We need to fundraise some additional money. So you're all here and hopefully want to see a solution. So this is also that soapbox to say, come and help us fundraise, and we will be able to get more. So
Did you want to talk about dredging?
I can, one of us can talk about it.
If you want to.
You could talk about it. It doesn't really matter.
So,
Oh, screw
yeah.
it.
So one of the solutions, obviously, is to dredge the bay and lagoon to get that water depth down again. That would be the main solution. The problem is the cost of dredging is ridiculous. The permit alone is, I thought it was $75,000, but I guess it could be $100,000 just to get the permit. Then to bring in the equipment to go ahead and dig that down a foot. I think the quote was like $1 million to lower the whole lake 1 foot.
Well, we have to pay per ton for removal. It's not just the dredging, but aside from just the cost of the permit to dredge, we have to pay for the weight of removal of nasty,
Of the
the
silt.
sediment and the silt, and
yes.
exactly, so of what's taken out, and the added challenge of finding a place that will take that too, because we can't just bring it to the dump. Years ago they made Monkey Island, but we don't necessarily want to make, Lenape Island or whatever other island we so feel inclined to have.
Yeah, and the other issue too is, through the Indian Lake is like almost 100 years old. Through the 100 years of dumping copper sulfate, and copper is a heavy metal, into the silt in the bottom, trying to get rid of that is going to be challenging as well, because, I don't know. Do you want to speak? Is it contaminated?
It can be. A lot of lakes used to treat their lakes by themselves. So when we put it in at, or not, we don't even put it in at label rate. We put it in at the effective rate that we know that it will be used, and that none of it, or very minuscule amount of it, will be left to just sit on the bottom. I don't know how the lake was treated back in the day, but people would just buy copper sulfate chunks or powders, and they would go out and either just hang it off the back of their boats and drive around. And everybody would just, I had one lake where they said every boat that they had in the lake had a bag of copper sulfate hanging off the back of it. So there could be buildup of copper sulfate at the bottom. There have been lakes that New York requires copper sulfate testing if you go over a certain amount of treatments per year, but some of the lakes that we've been doing a long time with copper sulfate, their test results came back very, very, very low. So it is a possibility that it could have contaminants from copper sulfate over the years, but most of the time it's going to be other metals that have gotten in there through other modes of contamination.
Yeah, and I can't speak for what they did. I've been on the board now for quite a long time, and I know when I first joined the board, I was the one who actually changed over to have the weed treatment people treat with copper sulfate. I can't speak to what happened before I was on the board, but I know that the weed treatment people weren't treating it with copper, and I know that the lake was treated with copper. So that's all I'm going to say. I ain't saying nothing else, but yeah. So I think in the past, which was the practice, I think dragging bags of copper behind boats was I guess the practice at the time, and Indian Lake was no different.
So, yeah, so dredging is just cost prohibitive. Okay. So, what our residents can do to help. We already do have a fundraising committee, and we have lots of other committees, and women's club, men's club, all different clubs in the community that are all providing, different things to fundraise. So this community is volunteer based, and all of those efforts really do go back to the community. So we always are looking for people who have ideas, reaching out to a trustee and, giving us your idea, but not just giving us your idea, giving us your time and your manpower to help get things through, because we are two volunteers who work full-time jobs, and we all have the same goal. We all want to get there, but we all have limited time and resources. So reaching out to us and volunteering your time and your thoughts and what experiences. So fundraising committee being one, like I had mentioned, the fundraising committee did really make it possible to get those 2 aerators, and many other things in the lake and the community. We work hand in hand with a lot of other committees as well. Ron spoke to what people are doing, what people had done, dumping things into the lake. So even taking action, removing things from the lake. If you see, leaves or branches or whatnot in the lake when you happen to be on the lake, pull them out and make sure that you're not dumping those things into the lake, as well as using non-copper sulfate fertilizers phosphorus. I apologize. Fertilizers, and make sure your neighbors aren't as well. Removing muck by a bucket and letting it dry out. This is the most labor-intensive one there is, but people definitely do it, and there is no permit required because it's all hand done.
So when you say muck, Shannon, just to be clear, are you referring to the sediment on the bottom?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what you all refer to it as, sediment or muck, but I know that muck makes me go yuck, so that's why I think of it as muck. So
okay. Muck makes me go yuck.
Yeah, so get out there, especially when we lower the lake. Efforts to just go out there and just start pulling some out, let it dry out, and then tossing it in the garbage. We don't need a permit for that. And then another effort is reducing leaves, trees from entering the lake. I was told that, I don't even know how many years ago, Monkey Island at one point had no trees on it, and now it has tons of trees. So, that just speaks to how things have changed over time. If we were able to clear that area, even the properties that surround the lake, all the trees, all the leaves that are falling in, once again, that is organics that are just filling the lake and making more muck, sediment in the lake. So trim them back.
Okay. Awesome, guys.
We're done.
Thank you so much. Hopefully, there's lots of great information in there for you guys. And I know you probably have tons and tons of questions. So we'll open up the Q&A for
So Jeff,
thing.
before you open up the questions, Joan, could you stand up a second? How are you? It's been a long time. So Joan was back when we did this, 20 years ago, and we had the original Bay and Lagoon committee that you guys were on, and you guys you were on it too? Who else was on that committee? Show of hands. And you guys did a lot. You raised money. I think you guys were the first one selling Christmas trees. You had that study done by, what was the name? I forget the name of the company. but you guys were really instrumental. I mean, you know, we tried everything, it helped, and, you know, I just wanted to, I'm glad you guys are here. I just wanted to recognize you for that.
Awesome. So, just to kind of go through this, I'll MC. Shannon and Ron and Kevin are probably going to be the ones to answer your questions. Obviously, raise your hand. I'll call on you. If you can stand up, state your name, where you live, and then ask your question. That'll be great. Janelle is taking notes in the back, and we're going to try to transcribe this and get the Q&A posted up on the site too for future questions and future rounds. So it's great. Go right ahead.
I've been following the 53 North Shore Road. 2 questions. The aerators, since you're concerned about electric, could they possibly be run on solar?
So these ones in particular could not be run on solar. We did look into solar powered aeration systems, and they just were not powerful enough to produce what we were looking, you know, to produce the results that we were looking to yield. So,
my next concern is our code is terribly infiltrated with muck and debris, so we're not getting anywhere, it seems, with what water pollution is doing for us. It seems just as bad as it's always been.
you're in the cove?
Yeah.
So,
I think they put a woodland cove.
So this scope right up here, Kev?
Yeah.
so we haven't put anything in that area yet.
For aerators wise.
Aerators wise, yes.
I know we don't have areas, but I'm just saying, it's just not, I mean, it gets so green and so unappealing that yesterday, as a matter of fact, I didn't even go near the water. It's just the algae was coming up terribly because it's so shallow.
Yeah.
That's our problem.
So that cove I did treat on. Last time I treated that. When I treated the rest of the lake, I think it was
What do you have, cameras on this guy?
22nd is when I was here in the main lake and I did my treatment. That cove was treated. Say that again. That cove was treated because there was some pond weeds that were popping up in there, and there was some algae popping up in there. The one thing that I've noticed about that cove is that everything kind of gets drove into it. So 90% of the cove could look beautiful, but that back section where everything gets pushed, it just kind of sits there. And then you have like the band of algae, it concentrates what's there, so what's there in other parts of the lake might not be bad, but because all of it's concentrated in one little area, it looks worse. And then from constant stuff being pushed into that cove, that back 10 to 15 foot is very, very shallow. So once it gets pushed into that cove, the heat of the water there, because it's so shallow, promotes the growth of that even further. So that little band there can just look way worse than the rest of the area.
So is there any options?
Other than continuously treating it, but treating it then promotes it to, if it's dead or alive, it's still there. So, other than that,
I think we can also put aeration systems in there as well. I mean, if we're blowing it from the corner out, will possibly help.
could. No.
Okay, she was next up. I'm sorry. Go right
I'm
ahead.
on 113 Sunset Trail,
And what's your name?
Eva Davis.
Awesome.
You guys do too. Anytime I complain to you, you're always on top of it, and you do great.
We take them as suggestions, not
Yes.
Yeah.
Plus, we're married, we're used to it.
Good. My neighbor and I was had a lot of problems. We don't have enough circulation in front of our walls. This is 113, so everything is stagnant there. Anything that comes into the lake, you've seen me there on the dock, comes and sits right in front of us. Your aerators are working, but not well enough to distribute what's closer to the wall out into the lake so that it can come back out into the bay. Can you move those aerators somehow?
So we could have them moved, but they are strategically placed to provide the right circulation underneath to provide the proper aeration. So they are not there to provide water flow, circulation. They're there to provide aeration. So the aeration, what that is doing is oxygenating the water so that it lessens the chance of the sediment buildup and it disperses the chemicals. So I don't know if anybody's noticed that when Solitude comes in and does a treatment on Monday, Tuesday everything's gone. Whereas in the past years, they'd come in on Monday and maybe it would take until Thursday or something to, take a few more days to see the full effect of it. So now the oxygenation and it's moving things underneath. So sometimes what might be needed, and I know that it's not what people are going to want to hear, but sometimes even putting personal bubblers outside your own homes to help really get a bigger burst of that water, create that extra circulation away.
They do make water circulators. They mount on the bottom of your dock. It's essentially a boat motor propeller that's in a casing, and it'll circulate water perpendicular laterally of your shoreline and kind of force stuff out. So those are things that you can buy on a commercial scale or you can buy on your own personal homeowner scale. What you said about the aeration is correct, is you want the aeration in the deepest part of the water body, because the more air or the more depth of water that you can put the air up through, the more effective that it is. Because you could put it over in like a 1 foot of water near this side of your shoreline, and it will move stuff there, but it's not really what it's for. It will create movement in the water. It will help in the lagoon for the duckweed water meal, because it'll come up, it'll bubble to the surface, and it'll kind of push. So you will have clear areas. But because the bay and the lagoon are so shallow, you would have to have
Hundreds.
like
So much.
100 aerators in there just to get stuff moving, and that's not really the purpose of the aerators. The aerators are just to get the air into the water.
So one of the big things too, because you brought up there's no movement back there. Now, in talking to some of the guys that have been here for a long, long time, and some of you guys may remember also, the back lagoon used to flow out. So the water that was coming in from Essling, one of the advantages of the main lake has is the water comes into the lake, flows underneath the bridges, and goes out, and that water turns over every 24 to 48 hours, right? So that water's constantly moving and turning over. That water used to go back into the bay and the lagoon and flow out. When they built Route 80 in the 1970s, they dammed off that flow. So there's no flow through there now. And that's one of the biggest problems with the sediment increase. But it's just, there's nowhere for it to go. Everything just sits there. So again, we had high hopes in the pellets that New Jersey doesn't want to do. And if anybody has contacts with, Army Corps of Engineers, the people that built the interstate, can they go back and do an environmental impact and maybe we can get something there? Because I don't know, but that's one of the biggest challenges with the Bay and Lagoon is the flow through, the water stagnant. So, awesome. Lauren.
I don't know, she might be.
Okay, you can go right ahead. Stand up. You were slow on the draw. You were slow on the draw.
Oh, Lauren showing 95 Sunset Trail. Where'd she know?
She's back.
Oh, no, right there, she moved up. I have a question about the filamentous blooms. Just because you gave us like a little understanding of the lily pads growing up from the bottom. The filamentous blooms, does the algae grow on the top, or I think they grow up from the bottom, right?
There's two different kinds. It's filamentous algae, but there's benthic filamentous algae and there's floating filamentous algae. It can grow both places. Over winter, it will grow on the bottom of the lake. You'll have benthic filamentous algae that will be on the bottom of the lake, and that stuff, when the water starts to warm up, will be the first thing that pops up to the surface. So when it forms during the hot spells that we're having here, it's connected. It's from the bottom to the top. Well, I don't know specifically how it's forming, if it's forming at the top or the bottom, but I believe it's probably forming from the
So
bottom
I was
up.
pulling some of them out,
Mhm.
and does it do the same thing like the lily pads that you would, is it beneficial to pull some out? I know that you
100%.
want some things, I just didn't know, with the lily pad, you said if you pulled things out, sometimes you could prevent it from
The
going away
filamentous
from the
algae
tubers, but then-
is
yeah.
its own unit. It's not rooted, there's nothing, when you pull it out, it's out.
Yeah. So is your approach for this, is there, if you keep some of it on the top, you can also prevent the sun from coming to the bottom and continuing to grow. Is there, when you go to observe the lake, what are the observations that are like, this needs to be treated, like this is covered over this certain percentage, or what is it?
It is, for one, is we can only treat once in a 14-day period.
Okay.
So if we do a treatment today, I cannot put anything in the water algicide-wise. If I don't put any herbicide in, I could come back and I do an herbicide in the same time frame, or a different time frame, but that's still, most of our products are 14 days.
Okay.
So that 14-day period, you can't do anything. And what happened the year before is we got on that cycle, but the algae would clear up for a week, and then 10 days later, 9 days later, it came back, and it was thick again. So we could never get ahead of it. Where
That was
if
the year
area
that
was smaller, that's where you lost all
you were
flow
low.
completely.
You were low.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go right ahead. I'm sorry.
My name is Lynn Ware and I live on Sandwich Road. My house is, it's opposite the little island. I wanted to ask Kevin, so you've been doing this here for 6 years. Can you tell me what areas of the lake you've been the most successful in? And how do you determine that success?
The main lake is the easier part of the lake to gauge. It reacts like a lake, where we had outlying factors of the late season naiad bloom that popped up that usually hadn't popped up before, but the main lake is more predictable, where the bay and lagoon is, I can be more proactive in the lake of catching areas where there's plants growing. Like I know where to look for growth first in the main lake, and I can hit those smaller areas before they bloom out of control and then it takes over a larger area. Then I'm chasing them. Where the bay and the lagoon, they act similar every single year, but what we're able to do in the factors of dissolved oxygen and treatment intervals are kind of the main roadblocks, and the shallowness and the temperature of the water in those areas. So we pretty much know what is going on. It's just trying to find the best solution so we get the best results for what we're doing.
But the best result doesn't involve dredging, which would be the best answer.
That would be the best answer. So you said the first slide of your presentation said what I say to most people when we get into these conversations, is any man-made lake will always try to return to what it was. I've got a lake in South Jersey that's I've been doing for 10 years, and I've lost a foot in their lake from when I started to where I am now. And we're managing it the best we can, but they know that the best option there is to get the sediment out.
And do you do any measurements in the bay and the lagoon to know if it's becoming shallower and shallower and how shallow it actually is?
It's not a physical measurement, but just a general observations of, I don't feel like it's getting that much shallower, but it was shallow to begin with.
Yes.
So,
All right, next question, Bob?
Bob Lash, 38 Sunset Trail. Two questions. One for Kevin about what we see in the back lagoon now, what's floating on the surface. That's filamentous algae.
Yes.
Okay, and that is floating basically.
It is floating, and because it's shallow, it's essentially stuck where it is.
Okay.
It's a floating algae, but because of the shallow nature of the lagoon, and if it's benthic and still floating connected together by strands of filaments of algae, it is no longer a moving mass. It's stuck in that area.
We had a program many years ago when it was a whole different type. We used to have seaweed looking stuff in the main lake. We had a barge with a big rake on it.
Mm-hmm.
Long and did that. I don't think we need that now.
Harvester.
A harvester type thing. Is there anything that could be developed for the back lagoon or the bay, not so deep? Maybe it only has to go down a foot or a foot and a half, or some type of braking mechanism that could go through there every once in a while and just rake out what's on the surface.
It's called a hydro rake.
Well, that's large scale. Hydro rake is a machine that has a pretty much crane on the front and a
Right.
big fork that scoops out.
I saw it. They had that down here at the main beach there one time. But something on a lesser scale. I mean, just run around that back lagoon. You know, I mean, it's the aerators that kind of push everything out, and something to go around, almost like like a snuff or something, just to clean it out. I don't know if there's anything on the market, whether you know anything.
I've always
Could we make?
I've always thought about how to make my job easier, and we've thought of different things you could do. You could make essentially a pitchfork rake that mounts to the front of your boat, and you go in there, you push it out, you push it up to a shoreline, and then you pull it all out and throw it out in the lake. That is something that could be done. It's nothing that we have in our.
I'd like to. Okay,
It's not
that's
that we
something I
have
think the
yet,
committee
but-
should look into myself. Maybe something we have to do on our own, okay? I've seen the big ones that have it back on, but then again, they're professional.
Something like
Bob
that
will
could
put you in
help
touch with Jackie, and she will put you in charge of that committee.
I have a question for Ron. About the dredging. I know you put some figures up there on the board. We had a program for a long time of silt removal.
Right, correct.
Are we still doing that or not? Too costly?
Yeah, because now what happened is to remove silt, they've now put a price on the permit for that as well.
I know, but I remember
I know.
the term, it was very important,
Yep, silt removal.
saying silt removal versus
Dredging.
dredging.
Correct.
Dredging is big dollars, silt removal, not so much, and you
Correct.
can do that.
And we used to put aside, I think it was
So we're not
10,000 a
really on
year.
a plan for that yet?
We haven't done that.
Okay.
And our Charlie Weldon was really big on making sure that every year, we put aside, you were on the board too, we put aside $10,000 a year, and every 3 years we'd have $30,000 to do
Back
this.
when we were putting $5,000 a year away in 1960,
Yep.
that was a lot of money.
It was.
$15,000 could get you a lot done. Today, they won't even bring a machine in for
Yeah.
$15,000.
I know that even for hydro raking, there was a big issue too, because like the swim lanes were getting filled in, so we had to get that done. So that the board has stopped doing that. I'll bring it up again and ask why, but and we haven't done that probably in.
It's just a
And it's
tag
just
along
been-
on the
it's just
silver
been
rule.
2 years,
The town's
2 or
doing
3
their
years.
job.
We did.
They're supposed to be
He's
by
talking
contract
about
cleaning
dredging.
out all the
He's talking about
spillways.
No, I know, but
I
we did
mean,
that.
out of the.
We did it 3 years ago.
Let me make a note of that, and I will bring that up because I know we used to ask the town to do. Yeah, we used to do that. Yep. All right, Bob. Thanks. Those are good points.
I think the lady in the front pink had a question.
Yeah.
She's okay.
Okay. I have water lilies growing behind my property. I'm Joan Bowling, 99 Sunset. I have water lilies growing behind my property. I don't want them. So next time you come in and treat, can you treat them?
I am treating the lilies in the bay on Monday.
I'm in the lagoon.
And the
In the
lagoon.
lagoon.
Both. I'm doing both.
Okay. Okay, Monday.
Okay.
Amanda Jones, 71 Sunset. I have a question about the them muck movers.
What?
I call them muck movers.
Muck
Those,
movers.
you know, the like propeller.
Yes.
You put it on the dock.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's actually called.
Circulate.
Circulator. Thank you. Because it's going to actually move them up. Essentially, if I put one on my dock, I'm going to be shooting stuff. Now, how would that affect the aerators in that area? If you had enough people around there start using them, or we have one and we share it or something like that, and we start moving stuff, are we going to then change the efficacy of the aerators because we've changed the topology?
No.
Topology of the
Any
bottom.
water movement that you can create.
Good.
I have 3 bubblers. Well,
Yeah.
compressor, I just
Yeah.
hurts for my one compressor.
Yes. Anything. Any movement is good movement.
The one thing with the circulators is an aeration unit does not put any power in the water. With the circulator, you have a potential to electrify the water. So that's the only thing, is if you had muskrats, if you had any kind of, if it was just old and the wire craze, you have to hook it up correctly to the GFI so that if it did do that, it would instantly pop, it would have to be hooked up correctly. It's not something that I would suggest that you just throw in the lake and connect to an extension cord.
No, it's like compressors are connected to GFI on there. So they'll, if
That's the only downfall about those fountains or anything like that, is you're technically putting electricity into the water. It's insulated, it's protected, but it's in the water, where the only thing that's in the water from your compressor box is that those repairs.
But I would encourage everybody to do it. If everybody put one on their
Make sure
own
they're
lot.
all
I have
Like,
bubblers around
yeah,
them.
I mean, as long as they're properly installed, yeah, as
That
long
was
as,
my problem.
but yeah.
I thought if I put it there and I start blowing it
So
out,
what
am
some-
I changing the
well,
bottom?
no, but sometimes what happens is it'll clear your area, and then it'll push it to your neighbors. So the neighbors will then get, a little upset, but if everybody on the bay and lagoon installs something themselves, and it's not, it's not your property, but it's your property, because it's something that you're living on the lake and you're looking at it, so you want to maintain what you're looking at, right? So if everyone puts one on and it's all blowing and circulating, it has nowhere to go but out, or to the I'm sorry. What?
No.
But if it moves to the main
So
lake,
if the stuff in the bay and lagoon is moving in conjunction with treatments, then the water is moving more. It's not. So what happens now is the stagnant areas are like the catch basins, where the stuff will go and get stuck. And once it gets stuck there, it'll accumulate more because it's now stuck in an area where it's not moving. Like if you got filamentous algae and it doesn't have anywhere to doesn't stick on top of a lily, it doesn't stick on the shoreline, it won't bloom out of control once it sits still. So the more water circulation that you have, in conjunction with treatments, in conjunction with everything else, the aeration system, right now if you have the biomass, but if the biomass is not there, it's taken care of, you get ahead of it, then all of those things working together help keep it clear going forward.
And Kevin, that woman who lived in the cove, that'd be a good solution for her as well, who's getting all this stuff pushed back.
It could, yeah. But again, you're not going to push it out of that cove.
Okay.
The wind's going to be blowing it right back into that cove.
So the thing with the aerators, because it's come up a couple of times, I suggest once we publish this, watching the video on how the aerators work, the aerators aren't moving the water around the lake. It's moving the cold water column at the bottom of the lake, injecting it with oxygen and pushing it up towards the top of the lake, and enriching that water with oxygen, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, helps to prevent the growth of the algae. It helps to prevent with the nutrients that are in the sediment at the bottom from releasing up into the water.
One of the main reasons why we suggested to put them in a couple years ago as well is we had multiple times in the past few years where we were not able to perform treatments in those areas because the dissolved oxygen was so low. Another factor of the stagnant water is it prevents the oxygen from flowing throughout the water column as well. And algae. The algae prevents water flow. Other stuff prevents water flow. Your dissolved oxygen then crashes. Plus, once you kill that algae, the algae does create oxygen because it's a plant. But then once you kill those larger biomasses of algae and they start to decompose in the water, then that sucks down the dissolved oxygen as well. It doesn't prevent the duckweed from forming, but it will push the duckweed to the shoreline.
So the back day right now, this here has been suffering from what I call duck storm, and it just, the wind just moves it from this side to that side. Oh, sorry. So I'm just wondering if they work out on duckweed and
Hi, I'm Georgia, I'm 90 on Sunset Trail. This is my neighbor, 3889. And Andrew and Lauren are like 2 houses down from 95. So I have the Aqua Blaster on my dock. Been running it and running it. I'm starting to see sand. Okay. But as you said, it fluctuates, it circulates, keeps going back, but I see sand. So is Andrew and Lauren. This woman right here, and I and Andrew, we're out there plucking away, letting it dry, and doing our part.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
My question is, you said, all right, so 2.3 million to dredge the lake. What about, what's it cost to dredge the lagoon?
I don't know. That wouldn't be Kevin. That's the estimate that the last time they did the study. I mean, if I just look at water area, I don't know. Like if you say 2.3 million for all of that, is it 10%? I don't know.
So it's going to cost you for a permit.
It's going to cost $1 million, yeah.
So it's going to be $100,000 for a permit,
permit.
and then if I would guess, I would say
Jenny,
between $200,000
no?
and $300,000. So maybe $400,000 in total.
For reference,
You can't, Jimmy. Sorry. Go ahead, Jimmy.
Just for reference, Tabor Lake up the road, probably 8 or 9 years ago, did their lake, and they had property to put what they dredged. And like I said, it could be 8, 9, 10 years ago, and they paid more than $500,000.
More than $500,000.
Without the disposal of the.
yeah, so it's perfect.
So I'm gonna say that it's probably, could be,
Probably could be in the million,
another
yeah.
50% more to double.
So, yeah, we can. All right, so I'm finished. So when my system is pushing it out, I know it's working. Yeah. So I'm seeing sand. Yeah. Well, yeah, it pushes it out, but then eventually the motor's so strong it brings it back in. And when we have a duckweed, that was a disaster because I had to keep straightening my motor. And between his system and the ones that you put, we're making leeway. We're seeing a difference. We are. But what you said earlier, when it bunches up in the middle section there and it forms these clumps, you said it's just going to remain there?
Well, it's going to die.
Is it eventually
What
going
I would love
die?
to do is, that's what the muck pellets are best for.
Okay.
Is it dies, it goes down there,
Right.
and you have all of this beneficial bacteria that's in the water that then kind of eats away at that.
Okay.
And
I mean, Lauren got on a canoe and started grabbing it.
Well, what's happening with Georgia, like our circulator, it sits on the bottom of the lake, and then we could move it to different locations. So instead of just blowing it to the middle of the lake, we were actually sweeping it towards the wall and then scooping stuff out.
And mine
So-
turns.
Yeah, yours like turns,
center,
and then
I'm
so-
getting everything.
So why I asked the question about the blooms coming up from the bottom is because I was pulling out the stuff from yours, thinking, okay, George is gonna let's get her more area on the top to get movement. But there's a wall. You can create a wall of the decomposing all the bottom stuff, and then I think that it feeds that. Does it feed the filamentous too? It's almost like it's like a super nutritious wall. And then I was pulling out these, I could just keep pulling. like super like on this canoe. It's like never ended. And putting it on her canoe. But that's why I was asking if it like I would be afraid what Shannon was saying if everyone put it if everyone pushes it in. Like I think it's better if you have stuff that pushes it towards the wall and then you.
It's a catch-22 there, because anywhere you start, it's going to be difficult. You started with the aeration system, you got stuff moving. I know sometimes when they sell those, they say, well, aeration systems will help increase depth. It will help increase depth around where the aeration stone is. It's really not going to help with depth when you get farther away from it. But when you put those in, you're now promoting circulation there. If there's phosphorus or all that stuff that's stuck in that sediment, and then we start to aerate it, there's a layer of phosphorus on the bottom that could then be reintroduced into the water column.
Two more questions, just really quick. With my power machine there, do you give any suggestions to make it flow better in any direction? Should I keep it forward? Should I keep it to the left to circulate the whole lake? Should I keep it to the right to outboard it out that way? Or do you have
There's really no right answer for that. Is trial and error. See what works best for you.
And my last question, because I guess unexpected. We have snow removal, and everybody is responsible for their snow and getting it, Can we mandate something to pick up your stuff off the lake? Because as I have my machine on, my neighbor's stuff that does nothing is coming into mine. So if they just took a minute, or an hour, like my neighbor does, maybe we wouldn't have that situation, and everybody helping out could help out, and we can get rid of this stuff.
Yeah.
There's a lot of lakes where I can make sure and almost guarantee that their shoreline will stay clear. And I can do that more easily in the main lake. In these smaller water bodies where we know we have issues, is I can't fix those all myself. I can only help with the chemical aspect and other factors. But in places where I know it's difficult, I always try to help.
This is going to be a long meeting. These people
will make a property due diligence and pull some out every now and then. You can put the filamentous algae in the flower beds. It will actually be good fertilizer. It's not toxic or anything.
Smells of.
It decomposes and it'll help promote growth in the flower beds.
Yeah.
Other things that I say, we gave you some ideas, is to not use phosphorus fertilizer. A lot of the companies that come in, Mr. Green or whatever it is, companies, it's their job to make your lawn green. And if you don't live near a lake, they could over-fertilize your lawn and your lawn looks beautiful. I've seen multiple times where I'm on a lake, not your lake, but other lakes, where I go along the shoreline and I see pellets all over the filamentous algae on the shoreline. They'll come right up to the shoreline and they're doing their job, and they're spreading it right into the lake. But it's not. They've got a job to do. They want to get it done quick, and they might not know that. I don't know. Yeah. But pellets in the water does the same thing that it does on your lawn. It makes it green. So.
Thank you very much. And Ron, is that like an actual estimate on Dredging Lagoon, what you were guessing? Or
No, I mean, it was just it's a guess, but I know the permit's going to be there, and I mean, I would think it's close. The only thing I would say, I like your idea about having people pick up. I don't think we can't mandate, but if you get involved with a group and you let people know, maybe, to Shannon's point, you get a T-shirt that says "muck is yuck" or something. And,
I said,
but get the muck out, get people involved.
Is there any way you could actually get an estimate to actually Dredging Lagoon?
Well, right off the bat, we know it's. But right off the bat, we know that it's $100,000 for the permit. So before we even have, I think we should even get a goal of getting $100,000 plus for the permit before we even start looking into it.
Just for the permit.
Before we can even do anything. So we know that we're looking at probably $1 million.
$2.3 for the whole lake.
Well, we don't know
We
if that
don't know,
2.3 is that. It depends how deep you want to go.
But yeah,
That's from
if like 9 years
7
ago
years
it was $500,000
Yeah.
without a permit,
I know from the state government or environmental protection on things like this.
we've
Your most expensive thing when it comes to doing that is your access. I don't know if the boats or how dredging works. We don't do dredging. The only thing that Solitude does is hydrating. We can't even say the word dredging or silt whenever we're doing stuff like that because of all the restrictions that New Jersey has put on. We weren't even allowed to hydrate for the past 2 to 3 years because New Jersey decided that they wanted to look at that.
Yeah.
Because you're disturbing the bottom of the lake, you could be removing sediment instead of organic material. They allowed us to start hydrating again, but the restrictions on all of that are so high that that's the main cost, and your mobilization and access into the lagoon is very limited. So my big boat, which I take into the lagoon because I like to chop the algae up with my outboard motor before I do the treatment, just fits under that bridge. I got like 3 inches between the bottom of that bridge and my outboard motor. So the access would be the biggest problem there. Is we couldn't even hydrate into the lagoon if we wanted to because there's no launch or access directly into the lagoon.
Thank you.
Doug.
Go ahead.
Doug.
Doug, go ahead.
Doug Halsenhauser, 10 West Shore Road. I've got this old catamaran that I'm trying to turn into a weed harvester. They're into it. I'm an engineer, I can build things. So that's one thing we had talked about. It'll just be small with the idea that we would, whatever muck that we, this is just the floating vegetation that we harvest. I'm thinking there's an island in each one of those areas, the bay and the lagoon. It wouldn't be a bad idea if we go through and knock down some brush. All this material is like 95% water. So once you put it onto land and let it dry out, it's just going to flatten out and be fine. And it'll smell for 3 or 4 days, but then again, so do I. So the other question I had is, if you're trying to move water, is there a possibility, and I don't even know, I haven't put the pencil to this yet, of taking a pipe literally from the dam by Essling Lake and just having water flow directly into the back of the lagoon, which would have the same head. You're talking about, what's that, 6 or 8 foot head, that you would be able to pipe the water into the lagoon directly, and you're going to be putting some sort of substantial flow out of the lagoon and just having the water, it won't raise or lower the lake, it won't affect anything else, but it will force the water to move in that direction. The other thing is, you talked about volunteerism. We drain the lake every 3 years. That's a great time to get 1 million pickle pails out there, all kinds of waders, and just remove the same thing, put it on the 2 islands, and do it as a coordinated effort. So you're exempt from it.
No more island. I live by an island. They're terrible.
Well, the idea is that we're talking about vegetation. It does go away. Yeah, we'll clean up the islands. The islands are mostly brush now anyhow, and that can be solved with no formula. But that is one of the opportunities, though. And the other thing, too, is to just have an event 2 or 3 times a year where people just go in there actively as an event and just rake. Now, you're talking about the area in that lagoon looks like it's about 1 acre or less. So doing pickle pails in a fire brigade thing really wouldn't take more than 2 or 3 days. Just out there with a bunch of people with pickle pails. It wouldn't be that bad. Take that out. Now, the question I have for Kevin, and this is an important one. You've got the airboat out there, and I notice there are 2 seats. Do you give rides?
So
in building a weed harvester, something that
That's a great idea, Doug.
definitely. If you're up for it, we can do it. It doesn't,
Because one of the slides said you can't do it
mechanically. That was harvesting weeds, though, not.
from the bottom. From the bottom.
We're not
If you're not touching the bottom of the lake, I don't think there's any restriction.
Yeah, so we're talking about taking vegetation out of the, all the other stuff and depositing it on the island.
And speaking of the islands there, and you guys can probably comment on this. I was not here to see it, but I've been told that those islands used to be flat without trees, with grills and horseshoe pits, and people would take their canoes out there, and people would hang out there and have a good time. So that's something too that if you get all of that vegetation down and get that out of the way, all that vegetation is just going right back into the lake again.
One other thing, this is just a side note, but I have a fish pond. This is a much smaller environment, and when I used to clean it out was I tried to do everything organically or whatever. So I used water hyacinth to clean out the lake. Now, obviously, one water hyacinth in that lake, and 3 months later, the whole lake will be covered. But what I did do, which instantly cleared up the fish pond, was I finally put in the ultraviolet light. And that just killed everything. It went into a retaining pond, the stuff died, it was clear. And I don't know if that's another solution, is to kill the stuff that's floating, the filamentous algae, kill it, with a non-biological way. Have a tube with a nice UV light.
Not on that large of scale.
No, okay.
No, upscale.
Right up the lake.
That large. No, great for small ponds up to probably about
3,500 gallons.
Yeah. Okay. Other than that, it costs itself out with its size.
That sounds good.
There was a question? Yes, go right ahead.
Come on there and not treat.
All right.
Can't be on while I'm treating.
Go right ahead.
In the spring we did a cleanup on the back pond, I think. That's the small one, right by the Indian road.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And we pulled out so much trash of the water, plastic bags, bottles. Yes, that one.
I didn't know that one.
So there is some stuff still left there. Because we couldn't reach it to go to the vegetation, we definitely want to go back in the fall. So if somebody can help with the bigger boat, we can certainly do it. This time around there was an interest that is taking care by the lake and they allow us to use their tire. And also there are at least 2 tires.
So that's
in the middle of the lake. That we won't be able to, because it's full of mud, so we won't be able to. So I don't know what
the biggest boat that we can put on that pond is a 10-foot gallon boat. That's the biggest boat that we can
don't even know if we own it.
So it can be limited to
Do we own that
the pond? Yeah, just that pond right there. Unfortunately, yes.
We do have some lakes where we're contracted to pick up trash.
Yeah, that's why the whole thing with the dam, you going on the boat is like fixing the dam and directly in the pond.
I mean, I don't think
how
we need.
filthy some people are with what we find in the lake.
And that's another thing. I mean, I honestly don't know where this trash coming from. And it's also found some construction
That's property that
material, right by the
trash
right there by the
property.
water. With
You can't put it in a dumpster or you
drain
take
and
it.
everything. It's washing out. So we don't need to finish in the fall. Probably we don't need a big one. But if anybody can give us the ball, that would be great. But for the tires, I don't know how we can do it. I mean, they work like regular tires, but because they are filled with mud, I assume it's harder. We saw these too, but I'm pretty. I don't know how they ended up in the middle.
So what you can do with the tires, if you shoot an email to Bob Covello, he's the president, and let the trustees see what we can do about it, okay?
Yeah.
That would be fine. Yeah, because that's something that they do. We don't have tires in the contract, unfortunately. But the trustees we can see if we can get some guys in there to try to help get that stuff out.
Yeah, okay.
So Bob Covello.
Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, Dan Honig, 86 East Shore. First of all, I live on the Indian Spring Pond, and I'd like to thank you this year. The weeds are less than they've been in a decade, so you're doing something about that. And we noticed also there's a film that goes on top of the water. is that the chemical you're using, or is that something from the environment?
It's a biofilm. It's, this year we had a lot of it early on, where it's just a mixture of pollen, insect casings, free decomposing organic material. And if the water's calm enough for a while, it'll just kind of collect on the surface. That's something that.
Yeah, I just didn't know if that was related.
That's not chemical related. We got a lot of people that say that the oil slips on the lakes whenever the oil and stuff are really thick, because that's kind of what it looks like on it. Creates that.
Yeah. And one last question for the committee up there. If these circulators are a good solution, can you recommend 2 or 3 of them, improved ones, that we could use on our homes without, so that we're doing the right thing?
I would recommend to reach out to your neighbors who have installed them and find out what they like best and see who has something that works.
Kevin, is that something Solitude
I could look into it. I don't know what the smallest stuff. I don't know the whole portfolio of what we sell in that department, but it may be something that we would be able to sell on a larger scale if there was a group buy.
I think I do.
So Dan, 2 things. Solitude does some of that work, and the company that we use that's in the deck for the aerators was Aqualink.
They do not, though.
They don't do those? Okay. So
This woman, what was hers called?
something thruster, aqua thruster?
I think that's what she said.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah, can I speak to that? There's Scott Bachman thruster, which you can get on Amazon, and then I found one that's the beach mat that sits on the bottom. It's like 2 companies in Michigan that are basically cleaning out their own garage, but with each other. Just depends what you want. If you want it on the dock, you're moving the top, you'll move, like Georgia has everything, moving a ton of it on the top, or if you want to get it from the bottom. The nice part that we're finding with the bottom is that new stuff isn't growing up after. So it's really preventing, just moving it once and then preventing growth back at that spot. But only 20, 30 feet. Even though they're going to advertise as 100 feet, maybe if it's sitting at the top, you're going to see water move 100 feet, but actually at the bottom, since it's so thick, it's like taking a leaf blower and holding it at the pile. Until you move the pile, it's still going to kind of stop at a certain point. Their horsepower motor, the cheapest one is $750 for half horsepower. It depends on the length of the electrical cord. You get 2550 or 100-foot cord. So the Scott's aerator, the top one is horsepower 1700. 100-foot cord, 1 horsepower. The one that we got, the Beach Max, I think it was, you got a horsepower. You just give me a horse and a half on it with a 90-foot cord for $1,000. So it was a good deal. And they have brackets so you could do the dock or on the ground.
And it's plugged into a GFCI.
That was, yes. There's a lot of things in the morning. GFI, don't put it on people are swimming. Don't walk in it. The kayaks, people are by, we turn it off.
Yep. Okay. We got one question back here. Go right ahead.
2 quick ones. So is there an optimal number of aerators that we should be looking at or that would be helpful?
So originally we were expected to get one more for the initial aeration plan, if that's what you're referring to, the aerators.
Yes.
So 1 more for the bay and lagoon area.
Is that really optimal for ours where?
So this was initially, they said that this would significantly help reduce what was going on in the bay and lagoon. Now it doesn't address the cove. Could we put in more? 100%. Cost prohibitive? Yes. So
I would personally say that it is working. Our dissolved oxygens that we've seen this year are higher than they were last year. So from that perspective, that's what I care about. I care about what the dissolved oxygen is in the water whenever I come to do my treatments. It's still lower in the lagoon, but it's always going to be lower in the lagoon. We've accepted that fact of if we do a treatment in the lagoon and the dissolved oxygen is low, the fish in the lagoon will just leave. And it'll rebound and then it'll come back. But it's definitely been significantly higher this year when I've checked the dissolved oxygen when I've been in there than it has in the past. So it is working. It works the best when it's in deeper water. So if you're aerating in 2 foot deep water, you're only aerating through that 2 foot. If you're aerating through 6 feet of water, you're aerating up through the 6 feet of water, but as it's coming up through the water, it's spreading. So the deeper the water, the more aeration you get. So again, like aeration works in this area, but it really, not to say it isn't the optimal thing to have, but because of the shallowness of the water, you could put aeration stations all over the pond, but that's just not the way to fix the problem. It's because it's doing what it's supposed to. It's putting air in the water. It's keeping the water circulated. The company you had designed the system specifically for this water body, the one that we presented a couple years ago, we had this. Essentially, I think they're almost pretty spot on from what I remember from the map that we presented for the systems. So, and then having the electric ones, you have the higher CFM of air movement into those stones. They have solar ones. I know you talked about putting solar ones on the island in the lagoon before. You just don't get the air movement with those. It's like a commercial one that you'd plug in your house. Those are nowhere near the capacity that a commercial unit would put into the water.
You had 2 questions. That was one, right?
Yeah, and actually, I just want to thank you all for doing this. And is there a way that we can communicate, like using the newsletter or the website for all of these issues for all the people that aren't here? Because I feel like we're not communicating to everybody how much they're adding to the problem.
Absolutely, and that's a very good point. And I don't know how well this video is going to turn out, but we are recording everything. We're going to try to get that on. We're definitely going to put the presentation up. Janelle's trying to capture the Q&A as best as she can so we can get that up there onto the website also. And there's been some very good points from the meeting that I want to add into the deck that aren't in the original deck. And we can look at a blast and especially with fall coming, with the leaves and the cleanups and everything else about getting that out. So Janelle, do you mind just giving me something to do there, and I'll work with Ron and Shannon to figure out what we can do.
We also maybe put that back to you. You know, we try out different things, but I don't know what we would do the best. Would be emails, you know, Facebook, you know, just suggestions, send them over. You know, this was our idea to try to get the word out, but sometimes we don't know maybe what works best to reach the people that we are currently reaching. So if you have ideas, let us know.
Yeah, and Shannon has volunteered to give her cell phone number. She can reach 24/7, 7 days. No.
Awesome. Andrew?
Yeah, Andrew Shaw, 95 Sunset. One more question. Last year it seemed like, maybe it was because of COVID, we were sitting inside. It seemed like you said you were doing every 14 days. You saw the boat maybe every 2 weeks, like almost on the dot. This year I saw a sign up in May, and I saw a sign this month. And I heard Ron said you sprayed the duckweed.
So signage is only for when they're using herbicides that they have to post for copper sulfate.
Are we getting less treatment this year? Are we seeing it the area?
Year to year, you have had less treatments. We had one in May, one in June, and one in July so far. So we did have.
And the June one was just duckweed. Is that?
The June one.
There was no sign up in June.
What's that?
There was no signs posted in June. It's only May and July.
I have it marked down in my notes that it was the 3. So the guy might not have put the signs up that day.
Yeah.
I try to do most of the treatments in the bay and the lagoon, but there is another guy. He comes every Monday just to look at the lagoon and the bay. He reports back on what it looks like on Mondays. Those reports we used to send every day or every time, but it's really just for our reference so that I don't have to come and look at it as often for the Bay Lagoon. He's looking at it every Monday. So, because of COVID, there has been times when it's difficult to get to all of our leads. So, we're was, I don't have the notes with me now, but I know that the bay, or not the bay, the lagoon earlier this year was at a lower DO that prevented him from treating whenever you wanted to treat filamentous algae in there.
But to be clear, are you posting signs when you treat with copper?
Anytime we put anything in the water, there's a sign that goes up.
Okay.
There should be a sign that goes up.
Okay.
If I do it, there's a sign that goes up. There may have been a time that was missed, but I don't believe
I wasn't aware of that. Okay.
there was.
And who's the signage you're going to treat?
Yeah.
So I think this is a good time to wrap.
So I do have a remedy that I want to try this year. So I think I've talked to you about it before. There's two things out there. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of
Alum?
alum,
Yep.
or if anyone's ever heard of a product called Phoslock. So I believe that the majority of the problems in these areas are because of high phosphorus levels. So there are two products. Alum is a phosphorus stripper. It strips the phosphorus out of the water column, binds to it, makes it heavy, makes it fall to the bottom of the lake. It works very well, but it doesn't get rid of the phosphorus. It just pulls all of it down to the bottom. So if you go through there with a motorboat, or everybody puts circulators in the lake and starts blowing it back up, you're reintroducing that phosphorus back into the water column. I would like to try Phoslock in the lagoon. Phoslock is a product that chemically binds to phosphorus. It's engineered so that it's missing an electron. It goes in, it steals an electron from the phosphorus, renders the phosphorus inert. It can never be phosphorus again. You can never put too much of it in the water, because if it doesn't chemically react with phosphorus, it'll sit on the bottom of the lake and it'll wait for phosphorus. And at some point in time, it'll steal an electron from phosphorus and render that phosphorus inert. So the good thing about Phoslock, it'll strip the phosphorus out of the water column. If you put enough of it in and it coats the bottom, it can strip the phosphorus out of the sediment that's in the bottom. So it's pretty expensive. I think on the small scale in the lagoon that we can do a trial for free. I need to go back and crunch some numbers and see how it works. But I think we could do the lagoon one time for free just to see how it works. If we did that for free, we'd definitely have to get it paid for the bay. But we have to see how it works in your lake first.
So I mean, you're giving a lot of time, and we don't expect everything for free.
But we have a contract. It's a lump sum contract, and like this year, there's wiggle room in there for stuff like this.
I mean, if it works, it would be something that we could add in next year's contract, and
definitely.
Yeah.
What are the downsides?
You got your boat right now? I'm just kidding.
I don't fit under the bridge with that boat.
What are the downsides when you had all the things where going in the water,
There are no restrictions. It is not a pesticide. It is not. It's not an herbicide, pesticide. It's a product that does not require a permit.
Okay.
So it comes in a pellet form. It's majority just clay. So, and then you put it in the boat, it creates a slurry, you spray it all over the surface of the water, it drops down through the water column, strips the phosphorus as it goes down through, and then the clay helps form a kind of like a sealed bottom on the lake. We want to get rid of the algae first, so we want to try to get to a point or do it early in the season before the algae is there. Because if the algae will just get caught up in the algae and just go through.
Next spring.
Either next spring, or if we can get it to a point where I possibly do an algae treatment in the bay for the lagoon and it clears up like the next day, where we can come back then and get it in the water. But again, it's still going to be in there. So I know it's thick in there now. I treated it last week. I see that there's dead algae, but it's still there. So we just have to find the right time to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kevin. That's
Now,
great.
when you say, I mean, we can talk about it offline, but it's a free trial, but it is very expensive.
It's expensive. I mean, again, I don't know how much it'd be for there, but
It's got to be cheaper than dredging, though, right?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing is with something like that, we would probably, since it could create a layer on the bottom, which sounds like would be effective, we would want to have our Doug's Pickle Bucket Brigade probably remove as much of the stuff off the bottom first.
Could. I mean,
No.
you could use it in unison with the muck pellets if New Jersey allows us to use them ever again,
Gotcha.
which they should. But
Okay.
the muck pellets are not that expensive. But it's something that you would put in every month.
To
And-
eat up all that stuff.
Yeah, I don't think you can put too many of them in. It's just how much can you. There is a dose, but like how much could you afford to put in each month?
Gotcha.
So,
All right.
but phosphok is something that came up in the past couple of years, and it's effectively used in small lakes, large lakes. We did a lake up in Pennsylvania, and we did a phosphok treatment in the lake, and it was 20,000 pounds of product. So it's a scalable product. So I don't know if we do water testing on the lake, but our water testing is in the main lake. There's a couple stations that we do. I don't know if we've ever pulled a phosphorus sample from the bay or the lagoon just to see what it is.
Okay.
So that's something we could possibly do as well, is just see what that level is before we go and put the product in, because
All right.
it's not going to happen that we test it and say, oh, there's no phosphorus in here at all. There's going to be phosphorus. I just want to know how much there is. 'Cause
Just a general like question. So there's twice that we can't get a boat back in there. Is that something that we need to, I don't know, just as the lagoon, look at? There's a little slip by Lollipop. There's a little like sliver that maybe we can put a ramp down there, or maybe someone who's got space in their backyard that we can actually make a boat access. Because that was twice. You said if we can get a bigger boat back,
if I can get my airboat in there,
we could do more.
I can stir it up with the airboat.
Is that something that we all back in there need to look at and boost that the potential access? So that's more going to be a question.
Yeah, I think that's something to bring up
I looked at it
to the
before,
board,
I'd
but
seen it.
yeah, you'd have to give up that whole landing, that whole whatever that lollipop with a bench seat is and stuff for a boat ramp, if it could even be done, and that would only get it into the bay, so you couldn't get it into the lagoon because there is none.
Yeah, there's like
when you're on Lollipop Bridge and you're looking at the lagoon, on the left, there's like a little,
if you're standing on the bridge. On
Right,
the
the property where they have the lilacs and all this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's like
yeah,
you guys own a little bit of that property,
on the
but
left.
it would be like a steep drop. I mean, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to measure it, see if it's even feasible, and then who owns the property, and
I think it's more of just our issue. Maybe it was in someone that has enough space to drive a boat.
Yeah. Yeah, something to think
So
about.
we can probably evaluate that.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great if we could do that, but that would be a question for the.
Pearson's allowed to vote, like equipment, Pearson's allowed, access to this, like, there's a fence down.
Yeah.
And then getting work done, people are willing to.
You know, and George, you bring that up, again, send Bob the email. I know you did that with the dock, and I think we were reactive to that, so why don't you just bring that up as well, and we'll talk about it on the board
I
level.
can put my 18-foot boat and my 19-foot boat into the lagoon under the bridge. It fits as long as the water level is where it is right now. So, but it's getting in there with the boat. With that boat, it is feasible. When I'm at your lake, if I come to the main lake, I bring my airboat. There's stumps, there's rocks. I don't want to stir up the sediment in the main lake because I'm doing the treatment, especially if I was using the Tribune, because it's less effective. I can do the bay with the airboat. There's two places where I can put into the bay, off of that Lollipop Bridge and in the parking lot. The parking lot's always blocked. There's always somebody parked there. And that's super steep. So I put it over by the bridge now. And hopefully I don't tear it up too much. But if I want to treat the bay and the lagoon, I have to come back on a separate day with a different boat. So That would be the only benefit of that is I would have one vote, but that's going to be expensive. Is it easier for me just to come back with a vote that I can get it done? Spend that money elsewhere.
All right, guys. Are there any more questions, comments, anything else? All right. Well, I know me personally, working on this, putting it together, finding answers was enlightening for me of a lot of the challenges, and I know there's a lot more questions still than answers, but we are making progress. We are trying to do the right things, but it is going to take a lot of manpower to get that addressed. Lots of great ideas. We'll get this posted on the site. Links to the videos. Hopefully this video turns out somewhat okay. I'm a little nervous about it, but thank you guys. Thank you.
And I just want to thank Jeff and Janelle for putting together this wonderful presentation, and Kevin for giving up his time for coming down, and Shannon and everybody else. And thank you guys for showing up.
Is there anybody in the bay and the lagoon that like the lilies? That like the lilies?